so I don't even know where to start. I'm not proud of this, but it's been eating at me for weeks and I don't know who else to tell. I can't go to the cops, I can't tell my friends, and if I try to bury it, I'm scared they'll find me again. So here I am, throwing it all out there. Maybe someone will understand, maybe not. This all started about 6 months ago. I was broke, and I don't mean can't afford Starbucks broke. I'm talking eviction notices, eating rice for dinner, turning off the lights when I heard footsteps at the door, broke. I dropped out of college 2 years ago and couldn't hold down a job for more than a few months. Between my crappy one-bedroom apartment and an endless pile of bills, I was drowning. One night I was scrolling Reddit at like 2 a.m. You know how it goes. One link turns into 10, and somehow you end up in the dark corners of the internet. That's when I stumbled across a post about the dark web. It was all generic stuff at first: drug markets, fake passports, hitmen, which I assumed was BS. But one comment caught my eye. It was buried at the bottom and said something like, "If you're smart, you don't buy on the dark web, you sell." That's where the real money is. I clicked on the guy's profile, but it was deleted. Something about that made it feel legit, like he'd said too much. I started digging. Forums, YouTube videos, sketchy tutorials. Most of it was garbage, but I learned enough to get my foot in the door. Setting up Tor, using a VPN, Bitcoin wallets, all that. I wasn't planning to sell drugs or weapons or anything insane. I just wanted to make enough cash to keep the lights on. Then I found the sweet spot: scamming. The idea was simple: pretend to sell something, take their money, and ghost them. No shipping, no overhead, no risk. I figured if people were dumb enough to trust some rando on the dark web, they deserved it. I set up my first fake shop, custom gaming rigs. It was stupidly easy. I stole some photos from legit websites, made up specs that sounded impressive, and priced them just low enough to seem like a steal. Within a day, I had my first customer. Some guy messaged me asking for a $2,000 rig. I gave him a Bitcoin address. He sent the money, and I blocked him. Just like that, $2,000 in my pocket. No risk, no consequences. Or so I thought. I should have stopped there, but it was like a drug. The rush of easy money, the thrill of getting away with it, it was addictive. Over the next few weeks, I expanded. I made fake listings for high-end headphones, rare sneakers, even concert tickets. The cash was rolling in faster than I could keep track of. I upgraded my apartment, bought a new laptop, even paid off some debts. For the first time in years, I felt like I was winning. But then things got weird. It started with little things. I'd come home and swear I'd left a light on that was now off. Or I'd hear faint knocks at my door late at night, but when I checked, no one was there. At first, I chalked it up to paranoia. I was ripping people off on the dark web. Maybe my conscience was messing with me. But then I noticed my laptop acting strange. Random pop-ups, files disappearing, my webcam light flickering even when I wasn't using it. One night I was sitting on the couch, scrolling Netflix, when I heard a loud crash from my kitchen. I jumped up, heart racing, and grabbed the closest thing to a weapon, a rusty wrench I'd been meaning to throw out. When I got to the kitchen, my window was wide open. I never opened that window. My first thought was a break-in, but nothing was missing. Not my wallet, not my laptop, not even the cash I kept in a drawer. Just the window open, curtains swaying in the breeze. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in the dark with the wrench, listening for any sound. Around 3 a.m. I got a notification on my laptop. It was from one of my scam accounts. Someone had sent me a message. It was a single sentence: "We know what you're doing." My stomach dropped. At first, I thought it was some pissed-off buyer trying to scare me, but then I realized something. I'd never shared this account with anyone. I was careful. Different usernames, different passwords, everything routed through layers of encryption. There was no way anyone should have been able to connect it to me. I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was just a coincidence, I told myself. But then the messages kept coming. Every day, a new one, each more specific than the last. You live on Redacted Street. Nice blue couch, looks comfy. Sleep tight, scammer. The worst part? They never asked for money or threatened to call the cops. It was like they were toying with me, letting me know they could get to me any time they wanted. One night I came home to find a package sitting outside my door. No address, no name, just a plain cardboard box. I stared at it for a long time, debating whether to even touch it. My curiosity got the better of me, and I brought it inside. Inside the box was a single Polaroid photo. It was a picture of me, sitting on my couch from inside my apartment. I don't remember much after that. I think I passed out. When I came to, the box and photo were gone, but my laptop was on, the screen glowing with another message. You can't run forever. I don't know who they are. I don't know what they want. All I know is they're watching, and they're not going to stop until they've had their fun. Or worse. That was the first time I really understood how far I'd gone. I wasn't scamming faceless usernames anymore. These were real people, and some of them were far scarier than I could have imagined, and that was just the beginning. After the Polaroid incident, I stopped everything cold turkey. No more scams, no more browsing the dark web, nothing. I wiped my laptop, changed my passwords, and even started looking into moving. The money I'd made wasn't enough to completely disappear, but I figured I could at least get out of my apartment and lay low for a while. For a couple of days, it was quiet. No knocks, no messages, no creepy packages. I started to think maybe they'd gotten bored and moved on. But then 3 nights later, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing. It was a text from an unknown number. Did you think we were done? I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. I didn't respond. I didn't even breathe. A few seconds later, another text came through. Check your email. I didn't want to. I really didn't want to, but I couldn't stop myself. I opened my laptop and logged in. There was a single email in my inbox with no subject line. The sender's address was a string of random letters and numbers that meant nothing to me. The email itself was short. Enjoy the show. There was a link at the bottom. Every rational part of me was screaming not to click it, but my curiosity, or maybe my fear, got the better of me. I clicked. It opened a live video feed. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. The screen was dark, grainy, like it was filmed on some cheap security camera. Then I realized it was my apartment. The feed was coming from inside my living room. The camera must have been hidden in one of the vents or something, because it had a wide-angle view of the entire room. I could see my couch, my coffee table, even the empty pizza box I'd left out like a dumbass. My stomach turned, but what made it worse, what made my blood run cold, was the timestamp on the video. It wasn't live. It was from earlier that night, about 2 hours before I'd gone to bed, when I'd been sitting there watching TV, but I wasn't alone. In the video, you could see someone standing just off to the side of the frame, barely visible in the shadows near the hallway. They weren't moving, they weren't doing anything, just standing there, watching me. I slammed my laptop shut and threw up right there on the floor. I don't think I've ever been that scared in my life. My first thought was to call the cops, but then I remembered I couldn't. If they started digging into why someone would be stalking me, they might uncover everything else I'd been doing. I was trapped. I stayed up the rest of the night, sitting in the corner of my bedroom with a knife, staring at the door. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind, I thought they were coming back. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. When the sun finally came up, I packed a bag and left. I didn't care where I went, I just needed to get out of that apartment. I ended up crashing at a cheap motel on the edge of town. The kind of place where the walls are so thin you can hear the guy in the next room snoring. It wasn't great, but it felt safer than going back home. I used a fake name at check-in, paid cash, and kept my phone turned off. For a while, it actually worked. No texts, no emails, nothing. But that didn't last long. A few nights later, I was lying in bed, half asleep, when I heard something outside. It was faint at first, like a scratching sound, but it got louder. I froze, straining to listen. It was coming from the door. I grabbed the knife I'd brought with me and crept over to the peephole. For a second, I thought it was just my paranoia, but then I saw it. A shadow moving just outside the door. Whoever it was, they weren't trying to break in, they were just standing there, dragging something sharp against the wood. Scratching. I backed away, my hands shaking so bad, I almost dropped the knife. Then, as suddenly as it started, the scratching stopped. I held my breath, waiting for them to try the door handle or knock, but nothing happened. After a few minutes of silence, I finally worked up the courage to look through the peephole again. There was no one there. I stayed up the rest of the night with all the lights on, clutching the knife like a lifeline. When morning came, I checked the door. Sure enough, there were deep gouges in the wood, like someone had been dragging a blade across it. I asked the front desk if they'd seen anything, but the guy working there just shrugged. He looked like he'd seen worse. I left the motel later that day. I didn't know where I was going, but staying there wasn't an option. I started driving aimlessly, stopping only for gas and food. Every time I pulled into a parking lot, I'd sit there for 20 minutes, watching to see if anyone was following me. I was losing it, completely unraveling, but I didn't know what else to do. Then yesterday I got another email. This one was different. No cryptic messages, no threats, just a single photo. It was of me, sleeping, in the motel. I'm done. I don't know who these people are or how they keep finding me, but I can't keep running. I'm out of money, out of options, and out of time. I don't know if I'll even be around to post part 3, but if I am, I'll try to update. If you're reading this, do me a favor, stay off the dark web. It's not worth it. After that last email, the one with the photo of me sleeping, I completely lost it. I packed up my stuff, ditched my car at a random gas station, and bought a used junker off some sketchy guy on Craigslist. It was barely running and smelled like cigarettes and mold, but I didn't care. I paid cash, no questions asked, and started driving again. I thought maybe if I kept moving, I could stay ahead of whoever was messing with me. But then something happened that made me realize I wasn't just being tracked. They were inside my head. I was driving through this tiny town in the middle of nowhere. You know the kind, one gas station, one diner, and not much else. I stopped at the diner to grab some food and charge my phone. It had been off for days, but I needed to check my bank account. When I turned it on, I had a new message waiting for me. No number, just unknown sender. Nice ride. Try the coffee? I froze. They knew. They always knew. I scanned the diner, my eyes darting to every person in the room. There were maybe 5 other people there, a waitress refilling someone's coffee, an old guy reading a newspaper, a trucker shoveling eggs into his mouth. None of them were paying me any attention, but that only made it worse. It could have been any of them. Hell, it could have been all of them. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't work. Instead, I just sat there, staring at my phone, until the waitress walked up to my table. "You all right, hun? You look like you've seen a ghost." I stammered something about not sleeping well and asked for the check. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was one of those polite smiles people give when they know you're lying. When I left the diner, I didn't go back to my car right away. I stood across the street, hiding behind a phone booth. Yes, those still exist in places like this. And watched. Sure enough, about 5 minutes later, a guy in a hoodie walked up to my car. He didn't try to break in or anything, he just stood there, staring at it like he was waiting for something. Then, as casually as if he were going for a stroll, he walked away and disappeared down an alley. That was when I realized this wasn't just about the dark web anymore. This was something bigger, something worse. These people, or whoever they weren't just messing with me for fun. They were hunting me. That night, I decided to try something different. Instead of driving aimlessly, I headed toward a city, hoping to blend into the crowd. I figured it'd be harder for them to track me in a place with a lot of people. I found a cheap Airbnb in a rundown part of town and paid for it with a prepaid card I'd picked up at a gas station. I didn't give my real name, of course. The place was disgusting. The walls were stained with something that looked like coffee, or maybe blood, I don't know, and the bed felt like it was stuffed with rocks. But at least it had locks on the doors. I barricaded myself inside and tried to sleep. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a sound. At first, I thought it was just the pipes or something, but then I heard it again, this faint, rhythmic tapping. It wasn't coming from the walls or the ceiling, it was coming from the floor. I got out of bed as quietly as I could and tiptoed over to the spot where the sound was loudest. The floorboards were old and warped, with gaps wide enough to see through. I crouched down and pressed my ear to the floor. The tapping stopped. And then I heard a voice. It was faint, almost a whisper, but I could make out the words, "You can't hide." I jumped back so fast I almost fell over. My first instinct was to grab my stuff and run, but as soon as I turned toward the door, I heard it again. This time, louder. "You can't hide." It wasn't coming from the floor anymore. It was coming from inside the room. I whipped around, heart hammering, and saw it. There was someone standing in the corner, their face completely obscured by shadows. They weren't moving, but I could feel them watching me. Every hair on my body stood on end. I grabbed the knife I'd been carrying and shouted, "Who the hell are you? What do you want?" No response. They just stood there, silent and still, like they were waiting for something. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the knife. I wanted to run, but my feet were glued to the floor. Then, without a word, they stepped forward. Just one step, but it was enough to send me over the edge. I bolted for the door, throwing the chair I'd used to barricade it out of the way, and ran into the hallway. When I looked back, the room was empty. Whoever or whatever had been in there was gone. I didn't stop running until I was back in my car. I didn't even bother grabbing my stuff. I just got in, turned the key, and drove as far as I could. By the time the sun came up, I was somewhere in the middle of nowhere again, with no idea what to do next. That brings me to now. I'm sitting in my car at a rest stop, trying to piece all of this together. Part of me wonders if I'm losing my mind, if the stress and lack of sleep are making me hallucinate. But then I look at the emails, the texts, the scratches on the motel door, and I know it's real. I don't know how they're doing it. I don't know why they picked me. All I know is that they're not going to stop. If anyone out there has been through something like this, if you know anything about what's happening to me, please, for the love of God, tell me what to do. I'm running out of places to hide. After the incident at the Airbnb, I stopped running. Not because I didn't want to, but because I had nowhere left to go. My money was gone. I was too paranoid to use any of my old accounts, and every time I tried to set up something new, I'd get hit with another message. "We're still watching." They were in my head. No matter where I went or what I did, they were always one step ahead. So I did the only thing I could think of. I went back to where it all started. When I first got into scamming on the dark web, I used a specific forum to set up shop. It was a small, hidden community, not as big as the marketplaces like Silk Road or Empire, but just as shady. It's where I made most of my money, and it's where I thought I might find answers. Getting back in wasn't easy. The forum had strict rules about rejoining if you'd been inactive, and I had to jump through a ton of hoops to prove I wasn't a narc. Eventually I got access again, and I started poking around. The first thing I noticed was a new thread pinned to the top of the forum. It was titled, "Scammers Beware, Know Your Victims." My stomach sank. The post was long, but the gist of it was this. Some people on the dark web aren't just buyers, they're predators. They look for scammers, track them down, and make them pay. Sometimes it's money, sometimes it's blood, but they always collect. The comments were filled with horror stories. One guy said he'd scammed someone for $500, only to find his car torched a week later. Another claimed they'd found pictures of their family taped to their front door. The worst one was from a user who said they'd been warned by the predators to stop scamming, but didn't listen. Their body was found 6 months later, tied to a chair in an abandoned warehouse. The cops ruled it a suicide, but everyone on the forum knew better. That's when I realized what I was dealing with. This wasn't just some pissed-off customer or a random hacker trying to mess with me. These were the predators. I'd caught their attention, and now I was their game. I tried reaching out to some of the other scammers on the forum, hoping someone could tell me how to make it stop. Most of them ignored me, but one guy replied. His username was Null Void, and his message was short and cryptic. "Once they've marked you, you're theirs. The only way out is to give them what they want." I messaged him back, begging for more information, but he never replied. It was like he'd vanished. I spent hours scrolling through the forum, looking for anything that might explain what they wanted, but there was nothing. No patterns, no demands, just a trail of destruction and fear. Then out of nowhere, I got an email. No subject line, no sender address, just a single sentence. "Come home." I didn't want to go back to my apartment. The idea of stepping foot in that place again made my skin crawl. But what choice did I have? If this was their way of telling me where to go, maybe I could finally confront them and end this nightmare. When I got there, the building felt different. It was too quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. My landlord hadn't even bothered to clean up my stuff. Everything was exactly how I'd left it, except for one thing, the Polaroid. It was sitting on the coffee table, face down. My hands were shaking as I picked it up. On the back, someone had written 3 words in jagged, uneven letters. "We're not done." I turned it over, expecting to see the same photo of me on the couch. But it wasn't. This one was worse. It was a picture of me standing in the hallway outside my apartment. My back was to the camera, and I was holding the door handle. But here's the thing. I hadn't opened the door yet. This was taken moments before I walked in. I dropped the photo and spun around, knife in hand. The hallway was empty. My head was spinning, and I felt like I was going to pass out. How were they always one step ahead? I didn't have time to think. My phone buzzed again. Another text. "Look up." I didn't want to. Every instinct in my body was screaming not to, but I couldn't stop myself. I tilted my head back and saw it. A tiny black camera tucked into the corner of the ceiling. I don't know how I'd never noticed it before, but now it was all I could see. Before I could do anything, the phone buzzed again. "Smile." That's when I broke. I started screaming, ripping the place apart, looking for anything that could be watching me. cameras, microphones, whatever. I tore through every drawer, every vent, every inch of the apartment. I found 3 more cameras, one in the kitchen, one in the bathroom, and one in my bedroom. But no matter how many I destroyed, I knew it didn't matter. They'd already won. They could see me, hear me, track me. There was no escape. And then the final text came. "We're here." I don't know how long I stood there, knife in hand, waiting for the door to burst open. Minutes, hours, it felt like an eternity, but no one came. No footsteps, no shadows under the door, nothing. When I finally worked up the courage to check the peephole, the hallway was empty. I stepped outside, half expecting someone to grab me, but the building was completely silent. That's when I saw it. At the far end of the hallway, taped to the wall, was a Polaroid. It was another picture of me, taken from the exact spot where I was standing. This time, the writing on the back was different. It wasn't a threat or a warning. It was a single question. Are you ready? This is it. The end. I don't know if anyone will read this, or if it even matters anymore, but I need to get it out. If nothing else, maybe this can be a warning for someone else. Or maybe it's just me screaming into the void one last time. Either way, this is my story. After I found that last Polaroid, the one with the question, "Are you ready?" I knew I couldn't stay in my apartment. I didn't even bother packing. I just grabbed my keys, my wallet, and the knife, and I left. I didn't have a plan. I just needed to move, to put as much distance as I could between me and whatever this was. I drove aimlessly for hours, my mind racing. Who were they? What did they want? Why me? I kept thinking about the stories I'd read on the dark web forum, the predators who hunted scammers. Was this what they did? Was this how they broke people? I had no answers, and every question felt like a weight pressing down on my chest. Around midnight, I found myself on an empty stretch of highway, the kind where the only light comes from your headlights and the occasional flicker of a passing sign. That's when my car started acting up. The engine sputtered, the dashboard lights flickered, and the whole thing stalled out. I coasted to the side of the road and sat there, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. It was too perfect, too coincidental. They'd done this. I don't know how, but they had. I stepped out of the car, knife in hand, and scanned the darkness. The only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. But I could feel it. Them. Watching. Waiting. I don't know how long I stood there before the first light appeared. It was small at first, just a faint glow in the distance, but it was moving, getting closer. A car, I thought. Maybe a truck. Relief washed over me for a split second. Someone who could help. But as the light got closer, I realized something was off. The headlights were too dim, the engine too quiet. It wasn't a car, it wasn't a truck. It was a van. A plain, white van, creeping down the highway at a snail's pace. As it got closer, I could see the outline of someone in the driver's seat. They weren't in a hurry. They knew exactly where I was. I didn't wait to find out what they were planning. I took off running into the woods, the knife clutched tightly in my hand. The branches tore at my clothes, the underbrush scraped my legs, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away. The van stopped. I heard the engine cut off, followed by the sound of a door opening and closing. Then came the footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching through the gravel and leaves. They weren't running. They didn't need to. I ran until my lungs felt like they were going to explode. When I couldn't go any further, I found a thick cluster of bushes and crouched down, trying to catch my breath. My heart was pounding so hard, I was sure they could hear it. I stayed as still as possible, listening for any sign of movement. That's when I heard it. A faint click. It was close, Too close. I couldn't see them, but I knew they were there, somewhere in the dark. I gripped the knife tighter, my hands slick with sweat. If they found me, I wasn't going down without a fight. Then the voice came. "Why are you hiding?" It was calm, almost friendly, but there was something in it, something that made my skin crawl. It wasn't coming from one direction, it was everywhere, surrounding me. "We just want to talk," the voice said. "No need to be scared." I stayed silent, my breath shallow. My mind was racing. How were they doing this? Was it a speaker, a trick? Or were they just that good? The voice changed, became more taunting. "Come on, scammer, don't make this harder than it has to be." I clenched the knife so hard my hands started to cramp. I wasn't going to let them win, not like this. I don't know how long I stayed hidden. It felt like hours, but it could have been minutes. The woods were dead silent. No crickets, no rustling leaves, nothing. Just me, alone in the dark, waiting for something to happen. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up, knife raised, and spun around, ready to fight. But there was no one there. The voice was gone. The footsteps, the lights, everything. It was like they'd never been there at all. I stumbled back to the road, half expecting the van to be waiting for me. But it wasn't. My car was still there, dead on the side of the highway. I got in, locked the doors, and tried to start it. Nothing. I tried again and again, but the engine wouldn't even turn over. Then in the rearview mirror, I saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the woods, barely visible in the dim light. They weren't moving, just watching. I don't remember how I got out of there. Maybe I ran, maybe I walked. The next thing I knew, I was in a diner, sitting in a booth, staring at a cup of coffee I didn't remember ordering. The waitress gave me a strange look, but didn't say anything. I pulled out my phone, hoping to find some shred of normalcy, but there was nothing. No messages, no emails, no missed calls. It was like they'd vanished, or maybe they'd finally gotten bored. But then I opened my photos. There was a new picture. It wasn't of me or my apartment or anything I recognized. It was a dark, blurry image of a door, the kind you'd find in a basement or an old industrial building, and written across it in red letters was a single word: soon. I don't know what they want. I don't know why they've let me live this long. Maybe this is part of the game, or maybe they're saving me for something worse. All I know is that it's not over. If you're reading this, please take my advice. Stay off the dark web. You think you're untouchable, that you're smarter than everyone else, but you're not. They're out there, waiting for people like you. And once they find you, they won't let go. They never let go.